everybody, Chris from Babylock. In this video, we're going to talk about one of my favorite stitches, the flatlock stitch. This is a great stitch because any machine that does 2, 3, and 4 thread capabilities can do the flatlock stitch. But before we get started with my tips on success, I just wanted to go over some threading, because threading for most flatlock stitches might be a little different and we need to really pay attention to that. And the first thing is something called a subsidiary looper, and that actually sits on that upper looper. And what it's going to do is it's going to help bring, as you can see, that lower looper thread to the needle. If that isn't in place, you're not going to have nothing other than a bunch of threads on your fabric. The second thing in our case is where that needle thread goes. I'm doing a 2-thread flatlock wide, and typically that would go in the 01 threading position, correct? Well, it's actually going to go into that upper looper threading position, and then you'll thread the needle as normal. So those two things are very key for successfully setting up. From there, it's a piece of cake. So I just want to show you the settings that I like to use. One of them is I really like that stitch length at a setting of 4. The other one is to make sure that I have my cutting width dial at its widest setting. That's going to help form the width of that stitch for me, and I'm going to have a little bit of that thread hanging over, which I'm going to need, and we'll see that in just a minute when I start sewing. And lastly, I actually put my cutting blade down, meaning I lock it. I don't want to trim the fabric. I don't want this ridge per se that you're going to get when you trim it. I want my fabric to actually lay nice and flat. And then lastly, before I do any stitching, I want to make sure, this is really important because I've done it several times, make sure that the eye of that subsidiary looper on your machine is actually sitting in the eye of that upper looper so that thread has no chance of getting in there, because you'll end up with a big mess. So everything's set, my blade is down, and I'm ready to start sewing. So I'm going to fold my fabric, in this case, right sides together, because I want those rungs to be on the right side of my fabric. And I'm going to slide it underneath the presser foot. And when I do this, what I'm after is making sure that that fabric edge is probably right about inside of this little nook on that presser foot. And then I'm going to start stitching. And as I'm stitching, you'll notice that the thread kind of hangs off. I shouldn't say kind of, it really does hang off the edge of that fabric edge. And you really want that, because that allows you to open that stitch and that stitch to lay flat. So this is that last stitch finger, which is actually controlled by that cutting width. So I'm going to continue stitching, and I'm always watching what I'm doing. I'm not watching what's happening in the back. I'm watching what I'm doing. And I oftentimes keep my left hand, another trick, to the left side of my presser foot, just to hold my fabric in place so it doesn't slide back and forth. We'll stitch to the end, follow that through, and then we'll take a look at our piece. If you look at this, it's not very attractive because you have all these loops that are hanging up on the top. But if I take my fabric edges and I pull, you'll see that now I have a much more attractive stitch. And you can see here on the left, this looks really nice. In the middle, though, I have a little bit of a fold there, and then I'm really nice at the end. So why the fold? This was something that I oftentimes struggled with when I first started with a flatlock, and really what it is that I grabbed too much of that fabric when I was stitching. So then I looked at, okay, what kind of aids could I use to help me? And I landed on 2 of them, meaning when I say aids, accessory feet, optional accessory feet. One of them was the blind hem foot. And because of the ledge on the blind hem foot, my fabric couldn't move past that. The second one that I oftentimes use, which I really like, is the lace applicator. Again, it has a ledge there, and when I set that ledge to the depth that I need, my fabric can't move past it. So let's take a look at how the blind hem actually works. So I've adjusted, when I talk about that ledge, I've adjusted the position of that ledge so that I have a distance from that needle to the ledge for my fabric fold. And that's something that you'll have to play with, and it will depend too also on your fabric. What I found that fabrics that have loft, like the sweatshirt fleece, versus a fabric like this lightweight knit, that guide is going to sit in a different position because of the loft of that fabric. So I've got this set up for the knit. I'm going to simply do the same thing I did, fold it in half, slide it underneath the presser foot, and in this case, when you look at this, and this is the beauty of this foot, is this ledge extends to the back almost to the needle, and you can see here's my fabric edge, and all I'm going to do is continue to watch that fabric edge next to that ledge, and it should help me keep my stitching consistent, meaning that it's going to only grab what I need it to grab so I have a consistent stitch when I'm done. And then we'll take a look at, again, you've got those loops, and then we'll open this flat. I'm going to keep opening this all the way down. And this is the right side. And then we'll look at that back side. And a lot of this will press out when you're done. Great thing about knits is you kind of do a little dance and a little wiggle, and that will help seed that stitch, and it kind of stretches that fabric just a little bit to help those threads, or meaning the stitch, pull out. And there is your flat lock stitch. So then I started experimenting, which I thought was really fun. And when I say experimenting, it was just different ways to use the flat lock stitch. In this case, I used a decorative thread in that needle with a top stitching needle, okay? And when I opened it up, you get this great decorative effect. Couldn't stop there. So then I went to joining strips of ribbon together. Now this is a flat lock narrow. It's a little bit narrow of a stitch. I didn't need that wide stitch, but these are just 3 separate widths of ribbon that were joined together with that flat lock stitch, and I did use that blind hem foot. And then I also used the flat lock stitch to hem my pocket on this dress. I used it to hem the sleeve. And then I used it to actually hem the bottom of that dress. So it was just a completely different way to hem a garment using a different stitch. And again, I used a decorative thread in that needle. And in this case, I probably used that lace applicator foot. So that is my successful hints, tips, guidance for that flat lock stitch. And I hope that you decide, or you have time to play with the stitch and maybe venture out using a decorative thread. So until next time, bye guys.